There is a dangerous moment narcissistic personalities fear more than confrontation. It is not your anger, not your revenge, not your raised voice, not your threats. It is something far quieter, far more unsettling. It is the moment you stop bleeding for people who secretly benefited from your pain. The moment your suffering no longer becomes their comfort, because something strange happens inside a super empath, and most people never see it coming. For years, you absorb. You carry emotions that do not belong to you. You walk into rooms and feel tension before words are spoken. You sense wounds behind masks, pain behind pride, fear behind cruelty. And because your heart was built to understand, you forgive, again, and again, and again. You explain behavior that should never have required explanation. You minimize disrespect. You excuse emotional chaos. You convince yourself that patience is love, that endurance is strength, that if you love deeply enough, determine carefully enough, sacrifice long enough, people will finally become safe. But life has a brutal way of exposing illusions. Because not everyone is searching for healing. Some are searching for access. Access to your empathy. Access to your emotional labor. Access to the tenderness you give so freely. And while you keep trying to understand their wounds, they quietly become comfortable inside yours. This is the invisible tragedy of the super empath. Your nervous system learns survival before it learns peace. You become hyper-aware. You study moods, tone shifts, silences, energy. You become emotionally prepared for storms that may arrive at any moment. Not because you are weak, not because you are dramatic, but because your inner world adapted to unpredictability. And survival can disguise itself as love. That is the painful truth. Somewhere inside this exhausting cycle, you begin mistaking emotional endurance for connection. You tell yourself, I'm struggling. They do care. They just do not know how to love. So you stay longer than your soul wanted. You explain longer than your spirit could handle. You carry burdens your body was never designed to hold. And slowly, something sacred inside you begins to disappear. Your laughter becomes quieter. Your peace becomes fragile. Your intuition starts whispering warnings your heart refuses to hear. You feel the exhaustion, but you call it loyalty. You feel the imbalance, but you call it compassion. You feel the loneliness, but you call it commitment. And this is where the deepest conflict begins, because your soul knows. Long before your mind admits it, your soul always knows. It knows when your kindness is being consumed instead of cherished. It knows when your presence is expected but never protected. It knows when love has become emotional survival. And eventually, the soul reaches a limit. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a candelabra, refusing to burn itself into darkness. You stop defending what keeps hurting you. You stop romanticizing pain. You stop negotiating with emotional starvation. And when that invisible threshold is crossed, the supernova begins. Understand this carefully. This is not about becoming cold. It is not about cruelty. It is not about revenge. The world misunderstands this transformation. They think empathy disappears. But true empathy never dies. It evolves. It becomes conscious, protected, discerning. The supernova is what happens when empathy finally refuses to be exploited, when compassion learns boundaries, when your soul remembers it deserves safety too. You were never weak. You were simply loyal to people who survived through emotional control and misunderstood your softness as permission. But softness was never weakness. Your heart was never the problem. The problem was believing your love had to earn dignity. And today, you are going to understand the 8 stages. Just of the Super Empath Supernova, the transformation narcissistic personalities never expect, because they understand guilt, they understand emotional dependency, they understand confusion, manipulation, fear. But there is one thing they rarely understand. The moment your soul wakes up, the moment your nervous system stops choosing survival over truth, the moment you realize your empathy was never meant to become your prison, and once that awakening begins, everything changes. Because the most powerful person in the room is not the loudest, not the coldest, not the most controlling. It is the person who finally remembers their own worth and refuses to abandon it again. This is where it starts. Quietly, almost innocently, not with weakness, but with love. You love deeply, not halfway, not cautiously. You feel people beyond their words. You notice pain hidden behind smiles. You recognize loneliness behind pride. And because your heart naturally searches for healing, you keep seeing potential where others see warning signs. You tell yourself, they are hurting, they will change, they just need understanding. And at first, this feels noble, compassionate, even spiritual. But here is the brutal truth few people say out loud. Your empathy becomes a doorway. And some people do not walk through doors. They invade them. Not everyone values tenderness. Some consume it. They study your patience. Depend on your forgiveness. Test your limits. And each time you excuse what wounded you, the boundary moves. A little further, a little deeper, until one day you realize something unsettling. You have become more committed to understanding them than protecting yourself. This is the sacred trap of overgiving. You begin abandoning your own needs. Not dramatically, not intentionally, but slowly. You stay quiet when your soul wants honesty. You tolerate behavior your body already rejects. You silence discomfort to preserve connection. And the dangerous part? You call it love. But compassion without boundaries becomes self-erasure. And self-erasure does not happen overnight. It happens one excuse at a time, one sacrifice at a time, one betrayal of yourself disguised as loyalty. Stage 2, emotional confusion. Now the fog enters. And this stage is dangerous because it does not feel dangerous. It feels confusing. Your intuition whispers, softly, persistently. Something feels wrong. Something feels uneven. But your mind argues against what your spirit already knows. You feel tension, disrespect, manipulation, emotional inconsistency. Yet somehow, you still blame yourself. You wonder if you are overreacting, too sensitive, too emotional. You begin editing your own reality. And this is where emotional confusion becomes psychological exhaustion. Your nervous system stays alert, always scanning. You overthink conversations, replay memories, analyze facial expressions, search for hidden meanings. You become hyper-aware of emotional weather, not because you enjoy overthinking, but because survival taught you to predict storms. This is not peace. This is survival disguised as loyalty. And survival is exhausting. Because loyalty should not require self-abandonment. Love should not feel like emotional detective work. Yet you keep searching for explanations. Maybe they did not mean it. Maybe they are stressed. Maybe you misunderstood. But confusion is rarely born from truth. Truth brings clarity. Confusion often appears when your reality keeps being challenged. And somewhere inside this emotional fog, you begin losing trust in yourself. Not because your intuition failed, because you kept overriding it, again, and again, and again. Stage 3, the soul fatigue. Eventually, the body keeps score, the soul keeps record, and exhaustion arrives. Not dramatic exhaustion, not the kind sleep easily fixes, something deeper. You feel drained after. Interactions, heavy, emotionally numb. You carry invisible weight through ordinary days. You smile while quietly collapsing inside. You answer messages you no longer have energy for. Show kindness your body struggles to sustain. And inside, something feels absent. This is the stage many super empaths misunderstand. They think they are becoming weak, broken, cold. But exhaustion is not weakness. It is your inner world sounding an alarm. Your nervous system can only survive emergency mode for so long. Your spirit can only ignore its own pain for so long. And eventually, the soul speaks. Not through words, through fatigue, through emptiness, through emotional heaviness. Your soul is saying, enough, enough shrinking, enough over-explaining, enough carrying what was never yours. But here is the tragedy. Many ignore this warning. They push harder, give more, endure longer. As if suffering longer will finally create peace. But ignored pain does not disappear. It deepens. And when enough is ignored, when exhaustion no longer stays silent, the next stage arrives. The awakening. And nothing remains the same after that. Stage 4, the fracture of illusion. This stage feels painful. Not because you are losing love, but because illusions die here. And illusions rarely leave quietly. For a long time, you survived on hope. Hope that understanding would heal what honesty could not. Hope that patience would transform what boundaries failed to stop. Hope that if you carried enough emotional weight, the connection would finally become safe. But something changes. The fog begins to thin. You stop romanticizing pain. You stop confusing chaos with connection. And suddenly, the mask slips. Not always dramatically. Sometimes through patterns you can no longer ignore. Promises repeated, but never honored. Kindness that appears only when access is threatened. Affection mixed with control. Attention mixed with guilt. And for the first time, you stop seeing isolated incidents. You see the pattern, the manipulation, the emotional games, the selective kindness, the exhausting cycle of closeness and distance. And awareness changes everything. Because once your spirit recognizes a pattern, your heart can no longer pretend it is accidental. This realization hurts deeply, not because truth is cruel, but because truth dismantles fantasies you once used for survival. You grieve, not only the person, but the version of reality you kept protecting. And that grief feels strange. You mourn potential, possibility, the future you imagined. But beneath the sadness, something sacred is happening. Your intuition is returning. Your inner voice grows louder. And you cannot unknow what your spirit finally recognizes. That is the fracture of illusion, the painful birth of clarity. Stage 5 emotional withdrawal. This is where narcissistic personalities become unsettled, because your energy changes. Quietly, powerfully, you stop chasing, stop over-explaining, stop defending your worth in conversations that were never designed to understand you. And something unfamiliar appears. Silence. Not dramatic silence, not punishment, sacred silence. For years, your energy may have been available on demand. Your empathy became emotional oxygen for people who never learned how to regulate themselves. You soothed, explained, absorbed tension, carried emotional responsibility that was never yours. But now, you begin protecting your emotional field. And this shift confuses people who depended on your emotional labor. Because access is ending, they feel distance. Not because you became cruel, because you became conscious. And this is where resistance often appears. More guilt, more pressure, more emotional pulling. Suddenly they accuse you of changing, becoming selfish, cold, difficult. But listen carefully. When unhealthy access disappears, people who benefited from it may call your healing betrayal, and that accusation can shake you. Because the old version of you feared disappointing others. The old version of you survived through emotional accommodation. But your soul is learning something new. Peace does not require permission. And slowly, you become less emotionally available for destruction. Not because you stopped caring. Because you finally started caring about yourself too. Stage 6, the return of self. This stage feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. Because after years of emotional adaptation, you begin meeting yourself again. And the truth is, many super empaths have spent so long studying others that they forget how to study themselves. But now, something shifts. You begin noticing your preferences, your limits, your truth. You ask questions you once avoided. What do I actually want? What drains me? What feels peaceful? And these questions feel revolutionary, because for so long, your identity may have revolved around fixing, helping, rescuing. You believed love meant emotional sacrifice, that your purpose was to hold everything together. But healing dismantles that belief. You remember something forgotten. Your life is not a rescue mission. You were never born to disappear inside someone else's chaos. And this realization feels both terrifying and beautiful. You stop negotiating with disrespect. Stop bargaining with people who repeatedly ignore your pain. Stop shrinking your needs to maintain fragile connections. And at first, this new version of you feels unfamiliar, almost guilty, because boundaries challenge old survival patterns. But guilt is not always proof you are wrong. Sometimes guilt is proof you are growing beyond conditioning. And then, a moment arrives. Quiet, powerful, liberating. For the first time, you realize you do not need permission to protect your peace. Not from family, not from partners, not from anyone. Because peace is not self. Peace is sacred. And once you remember that, the awakening becomes irreversible. Stage 7, the emotional firewall. Now your empathy evolves. And this evolution changes everything. Because empathy was never meant to destroy you. It was never meant to leave you emotionally starving while everyone else felt emotionally fed. For years, your compassion may have moved without protection. It spilled everywhere. You gave access too quickly, energy too freely. You believed caring meant carrying. That understanding meant enduring. That love required sacrifice. But something inside you has changed. Not your heart, your awareness. Now your empathy becomes intelligent, disciplined, aware. You still care. You still feel deeply. You still notice pain hidden behind behavior. But caring no longer means abandoning yourself. And this is the difference that transforms your entire emotional world. The old empathy asked, how do I save them? How do I help them heal? How much more can I endure to keep this connection alive? But awakened empathy asks a different question, a harder question, a sacred question. Why am I abandoning myself? And that question changes destiny, because suddenly your focus shifts. You stop studying people who refuse accountability, and start studying your own patterns. Why did I ignore my discomfort? Why did I tolerate emotional confusion? Why did guilt control my choices? And these questions do not weaken you. They free you. This is the birth of the emotional firewall, not a wall built from bitterness, but from wisdom, a boundary made of self-respect. You no longer absorb every emotion entering the room. You no longer volunteer your peace to chaos. And people notice. Some admire it, others resist it. Because boundaries reveal truth. They expose who respected your heart and who merely enjoyed access to it. And understand this carefully. Boundaries are not punishment. They are spiritual self-respect. They do not exist to hurt others. They exist to protect what is sacred inside you, your energy, your peace, your nervous system. And once this firewall forms, your spirit stops leaking. You begin standing differently inside your own life. More present, more grounded, more whole. Stage 8, the supernova, this is the stage people misunderstand because they expect rage, revenge, destruction. But the supernova is none of those things. The supernova is energetic refusal. It is the quiet power of no longer participating in systems designed to drain your soul. You stop shrinking, stop proving, stop performing emotional labor to earn basic respect. And suddenly, the manipulation begins to fail. Not because you fought harder, not because you became louder, because you stopped feeding the system. That is what changes everything. Manipulation survives through emotional supply, through guilt, fear, confusion, over-explanation. But when your spirit no longer ongoer offers those openings, the old cycle loses power. And this is what controlling energy cannot understand. A person who no longer fears abandonment. A person who chooses truth over attachment. A person who would rather stand alone in peace than remain loved inside emotional captivity. This transformation unsettles people because they remember the version of you that stayed silent, the version that tolerated, the version that kept returning. But that version is fading, and something stronger rises. Not colder, not cruel, clear, rooted, awake. The supernova is not the destruction of your empathy. It is the purification of it. Your compassion survives. But now it moves with discernment. Your kindness survives. But now it walks beside boundaries. And your soul remembers something it nearly forgot. Its value, its dignity. Its sacred right to exist without emotional chains. And when your spirit reaches this point, something irreversible happens. You stop needing permission to choose yourself. You stop fearing the loss of people who only loved your self-sacrifice. And you become impossible to own. Because the most dangerous person to manipulation is not the loudest. It is the one who finally remembers they belong to themselves. Listen carefully, and do not rush past these words. Because this may be the most important part of everything you have heard. The greatest mistake you can make is believing this story is about destroying others. It is not. It was never about revenge, never about punishment, never about becoming harder than the people who hurt you. That misunderstanding keeps many souls trapped, because when pain controls your healing, you remain emotionally connected to the very thing you are trying to escape. And that is not freedom. The real supernova is something far deeper, far more personal. It eradicates the version of you that accepted emotional starvation as love, the version of you that apologized for having needs, the version that confused endurance with devotion, the version that kept shrinking so others could remain comfortable. That version begins to fade, not violently, but truthfully, and something stronger rises, not colder, not bitter, clear, awake, grounded, unreachable by manipulation. Because real healing does not turn your heart into stone. It teaches your heart discernment. You finally understand something that once felt impossible to admit. Love should not require self-erasure. Connection should not demand your exhaustion. And peace should never feel guilty. So ask yourself honestly, who benefits when you stay small? Who profits from your guilt? Who survives because you keep betraying your own truth? These questions matter, because many people celebrate your kindness while depending on your silence. They praise your loyalty while quietly expecting your self-sacrifice. And for too long, you may have mistaken their comfort for love, but Healy, NG changes your vision. You begin noticing what your nervous system tried to tell you years ago, where you felt unsafe, where your spirit felt unseen, where your soul kept negotiating for basic respect. And this realization can feel painful, because awakening often begins with grief. Grief for the years you abandoned yourself. Grief for the boundaries you never protected. Grief for the love you kept trying to earn. But grief is not failure. Sometimes grief is the doorway back to yourself, because your healing is not rebellion. It is remembrance. The remembrance of your dignity, your value, your right to exist without emotional chains wrapped around your heart. And maybe this is the lesson life has been trying to place in your hands all along. Not that you must stop loving, but that you must stop disappearing inside love. Not that you must fear people, but that you must trust what your spirit already knows. If these stages felt painfully familiar, do not scroll away from this feeling. Do not silence what stirred inside you. Sit with it. Let it speak. Because awareness is uncomfortable before it becomes liberating. And the truth is, the transformation does not begin when your life becomes perfect. It begins the moment you stop lying to yourself about what hurts you. The moment you recognize the pattern. The moment you choose honesty over emotional survival. That is where freedom begins. And maybe, right now, you are standing inside that moment. So before you leave, ask yourself one final question. What part of you is ready to stop surviving and finally start belonging to yourself? Because the moment you recognize yourself, the transformation has already begun. And once the soul remembers its own worth, there is no returning to sleep.